10 years ago, on March 19, 2011, the United States and its military arm NATO unleashed a sustained bombardment against Libya, where Colonel Muammar Gaddafi had been in charge for over 4 decades. Gaddafi would be killed in brutal fashion 7 months later, while Libya descended into chaos as warring parties in this fractured country turned on each other. The U.S. NATO invasion of Libya was not restricted to air raids. In the opening hours of the attack, American and British warships and submarines fired scores of cruise missiles which, by March 21, 2011, had wiped out Gaddafi's entire strategic air defense system along the Libyan coastline. US B-2 Spirit bombers destroyed Libya's largest airport, in the capital Tripoli, while Tornado aircraft launched Storm Shadow missiles at numerous strategic targets. Gaddafi's critical mistake was to give up his nuclear weapons agenda, as noted by prominent Indian historian Vijay Prash. In a deal with the Western powers, Gaddafi had abandoned the enrichment of uranium for nuclear bombs, while sanctions were lifted on Libya. Various nations, including Iran and North Korea, informed Gaddafi that it was a serious error to weaken his defenses and pursue overtly friendly relations with the West. Hawkish Bush administration official John Bolton had explicitly warned Libya, Iran and Syria on April 5, 2003 that the U.S. attack on Iraq sends a message to those countries, conveying that the cost of their pursuit of weapons of mass destruction is potentially quite high. Early this century, Iraq had of course no nuclear or biological weapons, as was known before the March 2003 U.S. invasion began. Saddam Hussein was just as defenseless as Gaddafi would be 8 years later, both ideal targets and nations which, by no coincidence, possess major oil sources and lie in strategically important regions. The lesson is stark and ugly: if one wishes to be secure from attack by the imperial powers, turn one's country into a nuclear state or military fortress. Following 9 months of negotiations, on January 20, 2004 President George W. Bush said that Gaddafi had correctly committed himself to voluntarily liquidating his WMD programs. More than 10 facilities in Libya were dismantled where uranium enrichment had been taking place for nuclear bombs. Gaddafi's biological weapons arsenal was also destroyed. In 2005, some of the largest U.S. and British oil corporations flocked to Libya such as ExxonMobil, Chevron, and British Petroleum. That year they set up the U.S.-Libya Business Association. This rosy relationship, however, was not as it seemed. Washington's planned removal of Gaddafi dated to the first term of George W. Bush's presidency, part of his global pro-democracy campaign. Like Bashar al-Assad of Syria, Gaddafi was displaying too much independence and disobedience. After invading Afghanistan in October 2001, Bush intended to attack 7 other countries in 5 years, those being Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, and Lebanon. This was revealed by ex-NATO commander Wesley Clark, in comments he made in an interview on March 2, 2007. Rather tellingly, Clark stressed later on, Obama's invasion of Libya was planned under the Bush administration, Syria is next. Long before intervening militarily in Libya, the new President Barack Obama had ordered that the U.S. Treasury Department freeze the accounts of Gaddafi's state-owned Libyan National Oil Corporation, including the seizure of $30 billion. According to the IMF, Gaddafi further had 143.8 tons of gold, worth over $6.5 billion, deposited as international reserves in 25 countries. These funds were likewise frozen by the Americans. In sanctions imposed on Libya through the UN Security Council, the U.S.-NATO partnership appropriated the sovereign wealth funds, in which Libya had invested abroad as an oil-exporting country. Any unrest in Libya was a domestic issue. Gaddafi was not threatening to invade other countries, unlike the NATO organization, nor was he a menace to international security. He had no nuclear or biological weapons, and did not even have at his disposal a large and well-trained army. 3 months after the U.S. NATO invasion of Libya, his son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, said in an interview that Libya made crucial errors in its neglection of constructing a proper army, along with having delayed buying new weapons, especially from Russia. He went on that their example means one should never trust the West and should always be on alert. They thought Europeans were their friends. Our mistake was to be tolerant with our enemies. North Korea learnt the hard way long ago. In the early 1950s, the country had been leveled by U.S. Air Force bombing raids. The Kim dynasty thereafter armed the country to the teeth. Even so, President Bill Clinton almost ordered an attack on North Korea during the summer of 1994. What ultimately deterred the Americans was the might of North Korea's military, and consequently the Pentagon's grim prediction that such an invasion would result in perhaps 1 million deaths. In the event of a U.S. attack, North Korea's generals would have retaliated by decimating the South Korean capital Seoul with the full force of its arsenal, positioned just 50 miles or so away. As soon as the rebellion started in early 2011 in Benghazi, Libya's second-largest city, anti-Gaddafi insurgents advised by British and French special forces attempted to capture Libya's oil refineries, located in the north and northeast of the country. Vicious battles were subsequently fought around these oil installations. Almost immediately, a leading goal of the Western powers was revealed: retaining control over Libya's oil, using proxy fighters. A group of special forces from the Netherlands, a NATO and European Union nation, had been captured by Gaddafi's troops in Sirte, northern Libya, on February 27, 2011. 3 days later, 400 U.S. soldiers from the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit, and also the Marine Air Ground Task Force, landed in Crete, just 300 miles from the Libyan coastline. Major Carl Redding, spokesman for the U.S. Marine Corps, said that these troops had been dispatched as part of our contingency planning to provide the president flexibility on a full range of options regarding Libya. In the weeks before the March 2011 invasion, elite personnel from the Triumvirate of America, Britain and France were present on Libyan soil,